Hello and welcome to All You Need Notes, and this is the second video in a series for a paper run through for the first paper of the Edexcel IGCSE History course, and this is the Adept Studies paper, so the one for Germany and the Cold War most likely. And this video is all about question B. So what is question B? Question B is also known as the effects question. You'll be given an event from the specification, and all you need to do, and it's the same every single time, you need to explain two effects of it, two different effects of it. You've got about 10 to 12 minutes, so a bit longer than question A, but not too long. You need to be getting on and doing question C, and it's worth 8 marks overall. So how do you answer it? Quite simply. Firstly, you need to identify two different things that followed on from an event. So for example, when you see the event, you need to think, did it cause another event? So for example, the Munich Putsch led to Hitler being arrested, so that was a different event. Did it show something? For example, the hotline showed a de-escalation of tensions between the US and the Soviets. What happened at this event? And think politically, think what else did it cause? What happened after it? Signpost each paragraph for each effect. So one effect of whatever was, the second effect was in the next paragraph, just so that the examiner knows that you're doing two separate effects. And beware that often, not always though, but often it'll be phrased as an effect of something on something. So for example, what was the effect of the Bay of Pigs invasion on the Cold War? So don't just talk about two effects of the Bay of Pigs invasion, you need to talk about how that affected the Cold War. So you can't simply talk about the Bay of Pigs invasion and how that affected Cuba and Castro. You need to talk more globally than that. So you need to talk about how the Bay of Pigs invasion led to the Soviets becoming closer with Cuba and therefore giving them missiles. You need to talk about that, how that heightened tensions between America and the Soviets. So make sure you're very, very specific and read the question very, very carefully, because they will deduct marks if you don't. And also include as many relevant details and facts as you can. You should know a variety of things like dates, statistics, facts, just names of people as well. Any sort of historical knowledge is really important on this question. You're trying to show it off here. And using my other videos really helps. I've designed them especially to help you with question B. They go through the entire specification for Germany in the Cold War, and they give two effects of every single event that comes up on them. They're really easy to follow. If you learn those things and learn the statistics that I've given on them, question B will be a breeze. And that should form your revision, really, going through the entirety of the specification list and trying to think, do I know up here? So now we're on to an example question. The question is, explain two effects of the Great Depression on the Weimar Republic. So immediately here, think about what might count as an effect. So for example, people lost their jobs, support for extremist parties increased. It says specifically, and this should jump out at you as you read that question, on the Weimar Republic. These are both effects on Weimar, the ones I've quoted there, and so they're completely fine, but don't start talking about how it affected America. You can mention America because obviously the Great Depression happened there, but you shouldn't be talking about how loads of people in America lost their jobs or going on about America too much. You need to be focusing on Weimar. Try to remember any facts. So I've given some examples of facts you might have come across in history textbooks or in class. How many people were unemployed? How many votes did the communists or the Nazis get? Because obviously they were the extremist ones. And make sure, finally, that the two effects you give are completely different and that you can talk about them for a paragraph. So they need to be good effects and they need to be very, very different. So don't just say people lost their jobs and so ran out of food and people starved those are too similar for effects. Often I try to think, especially with Germany in this section, do one political effect, so it meant support for extremist parties increased, and one general one, so people lost their jobs. Again, all the effects are listed in the videos that I've given, so you can have a look at them in more detail. You get 4 marks for each paragraph, so for each effect, so you need to make sure you're doing 2 separate ones, because if the examiner thinks it's just one effect, they can only give you a mark out of 4. Don't know, you should always try to come up with a second one, even if it's only a sentence or 2 that you write. So this is an example of the slide that I give in my videos. So this is the Great Depression one. So those are my 2 effects. People lost their jobs, support for extremist parties increased. I won't go all through it now, but that's what I wrote down in the video. Those were the statistics that I used and how I explained that. Know that, then you can put that really, really easily into your example, into your actual answer. So here we are, explain 2 effects of the Great Depression on the Weimar Republic. The first effect of the Great Depression on the Weimar Republic was that people lost their jobs. Due to the Wall Street crash in September of 1929, America recalled loans from German banks, and so many businesses collapsed and were forced to fire people. As people didn't have much money to spend, even more businesses closed as they couldn't make a profit, and this severely affected the middle class. As a result, in 1933, over 50% of young people were unemployed. Because the government was getting less tax, the Chancellor, Brüning, had to reduce unemployment benefits, so people had little money and no job. The second effect was that support for extremist parties increased. Brüning also increased taxes, and this lost him support, as people didn't want to pay more money. He also had to use Article 48 to govern, which bypassed the Reichstag, the German parliament. It was used 66 times in 1932. This undermined trust in the constitution. The NSDAP and KPD benefited from public anger, and many joined private armies like the SA. This meant that the Nazis could claim to be helping unemployed people, as there were 400,000 SA members in 1930. The Nazis claimed that Jews and communists had caused the depression, and this was popular, so they were also blamed for the Treaty of Versailles, as they were also blamed for the Treaty of Versailles, so the Nazis got 107 seats in the 1930 election. So that's an example of how to... and before I go in to analyse how that's a good response, I'm going to briefly show you the mark scheme and how to get full marks. So firstly, always give 2 effects. A lot of people don't. They're struggling to find a second effect. Even if you write a simple statement and maybe give 1 fact, you can get 2 marks for that effect. It's not hard to score really highly on this. If you look at the exemplar answers on the Edexcel website, you'll see that actually it's not as detailed as you might think. It is easy to get 4 marks on this, and just make sure you do 2 completely different effects and that you always give them and explain them briefly. Make sure you use historical knowledge, so facts, details, names, dates, events, anything that you can remember to back up your answer. And explain clearly how the event given led to each effect. So I'll show you how I did that in my answer, but you need to be explaining how that effect happened. You can't just say the effect and give statistics about it. You need to show how the event that's been given led to the effect that happened, whatever that is. And finally, just make sure that the 2 effects are completely different, because you could only get a maximum of 4 marks if that's not true. So here you see in the level 2 descriptor, maximum 4 marks for an answer dealing with 1 consequence. This means that if you only do 1 effect, you can only get 4 marks maximum, so only half the marks. So in order to get level 3, this is what it details for it. Features of the period are analysed to explain consequences and to show how they lead to the outcome, and accurate and relevant information is included to support the explanation, showing good knowledge and understanding of the required features or characteristics of the period studied. So to get 8 marks, you need to fulfill both of those things. So you need to be talking about what happened and how that explains the effects that you've given, and show very, very clearly how that event led to the effect that you've stated. And you need to give proper information, accurate and relevant, so statistics, dates, events, names, etc., anything that you can remember to support what you're saying, to show good understanding of what happened. Right, going on then. So this is the answer that I've given, highlighted in pretty little colours there on the side. I'm going to show you why this is a good answer. So the parts in red, the first effect of the Great Depression on the Weimar Republic was, and the second effect was, they're very, very clearly stated. This is signposting, so you put in the first effect was, the second effect was, and also they're in separate paragraphs, so that when the examiners come to mark this, they'll see that I've got 2 completely separate effects, and so therefore I can get the most amount of marks for it. The parts in green are historical details, so they're facts, dates, events, etc., which provide evidence for the effect that I've given. So I'm saying, due to the Wall Street crash in September of 1929, America recalled loans from German banks. So this is showing that I know what the Wall Street crash was, and obviously that came before the Great Depression. So I'm giving a date there, September 1929. I'm giving an event which happened, so America recalled loans from German banks. I'm talking about the Wall Street crash, which is the cause of the Great Depression. Later on, in 1933, over 50% of young people were unemployed, so a date and a statistic for that. Because the government was getting less tax, the Chancellor had to reduce unemployment benefits. So I'm talking about an event. The Chancellor had to reduce unemployment benefits. I've given a name, Bruning, that shows historical detail. In second paragraph, Bruning also increased taxes, an event. Used Article 48, which bypassed the Reichstag, so I'm talking about this and I'm saying what it was, and I give a statistic, used 66 times. Then I give a long paragraph about how the extremist parties benefited from it, and loads of statistics there, and finally a statistic showing how the effect was achieved. They got 107 seats in the 1930 election. The blue parts, just going back a bit, they are the effects, very, very clearly in one phrase, right at the beginning of the paragraph. People lost their jobs, support for extremist parties increased. Really, really simple. You don't need to go into loads of detail, then just put the effect and then explain it. The parts in purple are the actual explanations. So I've given the historical detail, then you need to explain and show how those historical details that you've given led to the stated effect. So many businesses collapsed and were forced to fire people is an effect of America recalling loans from German banks. So that's the historical detail, and then saying that businesses collapsed and people were fired is an explanation which shows how people then lost their jobs. People didn't have much money to spend, even more businesses closed as they couldn't make a profit, and this severely affected the middle class. Again, just explanations. At the end, people had little money and no job. So all those just explain the historical details and lead them back to the effect. The better paragraph of these two is definitely the second one, which hammers home this idea that extremist parties' support increased. So this lost him support as people didn't want to pay more money. Very, very clearly why Bruning increasing taxes led to people liking him less. This undermined trust in the Constitution. So I've given historical detail and I've said what the effect of that was. And because it undermined trust in the Constitution, this meant that people were looking for another option and turned to the extremist options of the Nazis and the Communists. And I've put at the end, this was popular as they were also blamed for the Treaty of Versailles. So talking about how the Nazis blaming Jews and Communists for causing the Depression was popular because it did something else, but crucially it was popular, and so their support increased. So a simplified breakdown of how to answer this. Firstly, think of 2 effects of the event on something else. For example, what was the effect of the establishment of the hotline on superpower relations? Again, see my other videos on the channel for effects of everything listed in the specification. State each of the two effects in 2 separate paragraphs and clearly signpost them so that the examiner knows that they are different. The first effect was, the second effect was. The examiner won't be able to give you more than 4 marks if they are not sure that you've given 2 separate effects. Give relevant historical details, for example, facts, dates, names, events. Dates don't need to be fully accurate, so you don't need to be saying the 27th of February 1933 or whatever. You can just say in February 1933, in 1933, but obviously if you do know the full one, that looks more impressive, but you don't need to be memorising loads and loads of full dates. And explain how this event led to your stated effect. So here, for example, in this example question, explain 2 effects of the hotline on superpower relations. 2 effects of that was that it increased clarity between the 2 sides, and that both learned lessons, and this therefore led to decreased tensions. So here, for example, is the first paragraph of an answer to that question. One effect of the establishment of the hotline was that it decreased tensions between America and the Soviet Union. Immediately decreased tensions, that's my effect. This telephone line was set up in 1963 between Washington and Moscow, and it allowed any future conflicts to be avoided by direct communication. That's historical details. It showed that both sides had learnt lessons, so that's explaining it. So they'd learnt lessons. That's an explanation of how the establishment of the hotline led to decreased tensions. And then I talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis, where America has been close to a military invasion of Cuba. That's a historical detail. So the hotline allowed increased clarity between the 2 sides, so they were less likely to go into conflict with one another. Increased clarity, that's an explanation of how this hotline meant that they were less likely to go to war, and therefore tensions decreased. More historical detail. This led to less fear of nuclear war, and both sides began producing less nuclear weapons. And then explanation, and so tensions decreased between the 2 sides. So that's how you can do it very, very simply. So top tips for this question. The question tells you to explain 2 effects, not just give them, explain them. You need to say how those effects came about, i.e. how did the event that's given lead to those effects. So how did the Munich Putsch lead to increased Nazi popularity? Well, think about the reasons why. So if it said give it 2 effects of the Munich Putsch, or explain 2 effects of it, and you said, well, it meant that one effect of it was that Nazi popularity increased. So think about then why it increased. What historical details could explain why it increased? Well, there was a trial. Hitler was in the newspapers. He said lots of things, and this attracted media attention. So people paid more attention to it. People became more aware of the Nazis, and so they became more popular. And you need to give details and say how everything that you've described led to your effect. Connectives are a really good idea to use throughout as a result, so therefore, especially if you're providing historical details, just to back up, to give evidence of stuff. So if you're saying the Nazis had increased popularity, you could say, as a result of this, they got however many seats in the elections of this year. So this shows that you've got evidence and historical detail that backs up what you're saying. Again, just reiterating it because it's so important, make sure that the 2 effects are completely different. So people suffered and people lost their jobs. They're too similar. Think about the direct effect and the political effect. People suffered, extreme parties gained support. The direct effect was people suffered, and the political effect was that extremist parties gained support. This doesn't always work for everything, but make sure that the 2 effects you give are completely different all the same. Always try to think of the second effect. This will give you an extra up to 4 marks. Don't limit yourself here. Even if you have absolutely no idea and you've forgotten everything, just write down a simple sentence and try to back it up with whatever you can think of. And remember that, again, it is the effect of something on something else. So don't talk about America. If it was on depression, for example, you need to talk about the Weimar Republic. So that is the end of this video for the all you need notes for Edexcel IGCSE History, and this was for question B on paper 1. I am going to be putting out a third video for question C. There's also one for question A if you haven't seen that, as well as all my videos explaining 2 effects of absolutely everything in the specification for Germany and the Cold War, which is what you need for this paper. So do make sure you look at those as well, because this question will be so much easier for that. So thank you very much for watching. Bye. Bye.